Ogi, the last time we spoke, the conversation seemed to go in a completely different direction. So I think for this one, let's focus on the hard problem of consciousness. Just bearing in mind that I enjoyed the previous conversation, so it's not that I didn't enjoy it. With this conversation, let's focus on the hard problem of consciousness. You and Sai are dismissive of this problem. Let's discuss exactly why you guys are so dismissive of the hard problem of consciousness. And thereafter, we'll focus on your theory of consciousness and how it ties into unexplained phenomena, well, poorly explained phenomena like mental disorder.
Sure. Well, frankly, I'm still a little surprised that the hard problem is still part of any scientific conversation. It was at least understandable in the 1990s before we had a good understanding of neuroscience, and before Steve Grossberg developed his mathematical framework for understanding a lot of these mental functions. But at this point, so much is known about consciousness. It's so advanced and developed. And yet, I've learned that there's so many people out there that believe the hard problem is valid, that there's some validity to challenging this relationship between mind and body, between subjective experience and objective reality. Which at the heart of it, the hard problem is the statement for those in the audience that may not be familiar with the hard problem. It's this assertion that we all observe that when we reflect on our thoughts, when we reflect on our mental experience, it seems intangible, incorporeal, immaterial. And yet we know inside our head are neurons and blood and molecules and protons and atoms and physical stuff. So the hard problem is simply the observation that, wow, how does objective public physical stuff create subjective, intangible, private stuff? That is the hard problem. And indeed, it looks like mystery, but it's no different than any other scientific mystery. The history of science is replete with hard problems. And to help us understand just how silly, truly silly, how anti-intellectual, anti-scientific, naive the hard problem of consciousness actually is, let's look at the very first hard problem in the history of science, which was the question of gravity. And in fact, the scientist who first formulated the first hard problem was Isaac Newton. I'm actually a huge fan of Isaac Newton. I'm a big fan of him because most people don't realize he was a spiritual mystic guy that thought he wanted to overthrow the Church of England with his own private belief system. So I love Isaac Newton, but Newton was actually the first to articulate the hard problem. He said, just like the hard problem of consciousness, with gravity, there's two objects and they don't touch, they don't send signals, we can't detect any information being exchanged. Somehow two objects apart influence each other. This is mystical, said Newton. This is impossible to understand. Nobody, and he even said people who know philosophy, are competent philosophy, must recognize that this is an impossible problem. And then he went on to say that therefore it must be divine, it must be God, some kind of mystic transcendent force behind two objects. So all this shows is that when the human mind encounters a tough challenge, something that seems on the face of it inscrutable, we don't want to believe that it's going to be hard for that it's just us, our own personal inadequacy. We want to proclaim it a hard problem for everyone. If I'm not smart enough to figure it out, then nobody should figure this out because it is a deep and mystical problem. So Newton was the first to articulate the hard problem about gravity. Gravity and consciousness, very similar. What is going on? It does on the face of it seem baffling. I don't want to deny that. It does on the face of it seem baffling. But everything, what is time? That's baffling. What is the origin of the universe? Baffling. Origin of life? Baffling. What are the key ingredients of life? Even that, we know a heck of a lot more, but for a long time, deeply baffling. Science is about solving the baffling things. There's no reason to take any problem and elevate it to some spiritual, mystic level. So what happened? Let's first look at what happened with the hard problem of gravity to help us understand how to think about the hard problem of consciousness. So with gravity, who solved the hard problem of gravity? It was Einstein, not a philosopher, somebody who got deep and dirty and down in the muck of physical reality. He cared about the details of physical reality. And this is important. Whenever somebody says there's a hard problem, they're immediately walling off all kinds of knowledge. They're saying, yes, everything else is irrelevant. Only the mystery itself matters. Only this mystery of gravity. There's a force that connects two objects. I don't care about space. I don't care about time. The size of the objects doesn't matter. The velocity of the objects, all that's the easy stuff, scientists say. The mystery is the gravity itself. But Einstein said no. Rather than looking at gravity as a mystical force, he looked at everything around. He took a holistic view. What is space? Asked Einstein. What is time? Asked Einstein. What is mass? Is it fixed like we assume in the hard problem? He challenged all of these assumptions that fed this hard problem, this notion that gravity is mystic and impossible. He challenged all of them, and he came up with a whole new notion of space, a whole new notion of time, a whole new notion of mass. Mass can change. Depending on how fast you go, the mass changes. He showed it all works together. And incredibly enough, he showed that Newton was wrong, that two objects actually do directly physically influence each other because they warp space-time. It turns out space-time is a dynamic structure, is what Einstein said. It's a dynamic structure that can be influenced in a dynamic way by objects moving dynamically. The heavier an object is, the more it bends space, the more gravity it exerts. It's just altering the trajectory of objects through space-time. It just took inspired creative mathematics, a higher perspective, a broader perspective to solve the problem. The hard problem was simply a celebration of ignorance. On the face of it, this is tough. Sure, but that doesn't mean it's a cosmic mystery. It doesn't mean it's a divine mystery. It just means it's tough. Now let's look at consciousness. Same exact thing. Yes, it is very puzzling, very mysterious and enigmatic that the physical junk in our brain, the spaghetti in our brain, can feel love and write books and lust after other people. All of this comes out of it is mysterious. But again, Science's job is to illuminate the mysterious. That's what we're here for. We don't say, oh, it's too mysterious to tackle, and any explanation you come up with is going to be wrong. That's anti-intellectual, anti-scientific. That's going back to pre-scientific days. That's a faith-based proclamation of the immortality of the soul. If you're saying there's the mind is on some other plane, some energy, you're just dressing up the very old conviction, the ancient conviction that we have a immaterial soul in academic jargon. That's all it is. So what happened? How was consciousness solved? Exactly like Einstein did. First, you have to go in a higher perspective. You have to reject these human biased assumptions about what is public, what is private, what is objective, what is subjective. Those are just superficial terms to describe what we are observing superficially about our own stream of consciousness. But just like gravity, it turns out there's other things happening, that these things we thought we could ignore, space and time and velocity, that these things didn't seem at all relevant, are relevant. The same with consciousness. There is a lot going on in our brain other than just that moment of consciousness itself. And you have to step out, take this broader perspective. Specifically, as I spoke about on your show last time, it takes three recursively hierarchical levels of dynamics to produce consciousness. That's a physical fact. You can't do consciousness without three levels of consciousness. And in fact, humans have a fourth level, which allows us to have self-consciousness. Only humans and probably our Homo ancestors, Neanderthals, Homo erectus, I don't know, maybe Homo habilis, that's a little more questionable, but definitely earlier humans than modern humans almost certainly had self-consciousness too. But even then, it really takes some special conditions to be self-conscious. And here already, we realize one of the big fallacies in the hard problem, this assumption that consciousness is a single thing. There's different forms of consciousness. That alone opens up whole new worlds of understanding. And what was by insisting that there's something mystical about that this problem is off limits somehow, that we can't reach it through physics. It's just balderdash, and it's just sitting on your fat ass and saying, I refuse to listen to anything or explore because I know, my parochial view of this thing, that must be right. It does drive me crazy.
Do you think that?
Go ahead.
Do you think a fundamental reason why this is such a big problem is because only you have access to your own consciousness? Do you think because philosophers often come with that angle of it's truly subjective. There's no true way for you to explain someone else's experience from their experience. It's almost an impossibility with subjectivity. And if you think about it, science is the study of objects, not really subjects in that sense. Do you think that's what gives the ammunition to philosophers who claim, like, look, this is something that is hard. This is definitely a difficult.
Well, see, I think we're giving too much credence, too much respect to this notion that we have a private subjectivity that nobody else can access. First of all, we generally don't really know what we're thinking, why we're thinking it. We all have a lot of confusion about why we feel certain ways, why we think certain ways. We have to derive clues ourselves to know what we're about, what we're thinking. We have to talk with other people. Talking with other people helps us understand our own views. That's why it's so helpful to express our feelings to others. That's why group therapy is so effective. We don't really understand even how we feel or think unless we can interact and hear other people's reactions. Just the idea that somehow, our subjective experience is some magic, inviolable thing that only we have access to. No, I mean, that's what books are for. That's why we talk to each other. Books are expressions of that inner self. And as any writer will tell you, that it's never perfect. You write a sentence that's trying to capture what you're feeling. You don't know if it's complete, and then you look at it and you think some more and say, well, maybe I don't quite feel that way. So we ourselves are using the exact same tools to understand our own thoughts and subjective experience that others use to understand our subjective thoughts and experiences. So I don't want to ennoble this notion that somehow, yes, we can access our thoughts in some perfect, impermeable way. No, it's just not how it is at all. One part of our brain is trying to figure out what's going on in the other part of our brain. And this is happening at many levels simultaneously all the time. So there's not some monad, there's some not perfect monad of consciousness. That's part of this mistake. It's the same thinking of gravity as just a perfect force that's like a thread connecting one object to another. It doesn't exist. And our pure subjective consciousness doesn't exist. What do you think either?
Of the fact that even gravity at this point, we're struggling to find a theory of everything? Well, in terms of trying to find a combination for where gravity ends in space, in relativity, and where quantum mechanics begins. This seems to be a fundamental problem in terms of science. Do you think that could be a sort of key indicator that this problem, this hard problem, truly is actually quite that difficult because there's still a fundamental gap in our knowledge with reality?
Well, again, I would say, and I agree, that's also a valid mystery. We look at that. Quantum physics seems one way. Gravity seems another way. How are they compatible? A great mystery. Absolutely. A hard problem, unsolvable. We need God. We need mysticism. We can't study it. Hell no. Hell no. We're going to figure it out. Personally, I myself believe some of these answers are going to come by integrating the way of mind with the way of matter. Physicists are locked into one way of seeing logic, reason. They abandoned the dynamics of purpose 400 years ago. They're in the dynamics of aimlessness, the dynamics of non-purpose. And that's what they're figuring out. So personally, I believe some of these answers are going to come once we start folding in the dynamics of purpose, mind, with matter. I personally feel like there's been a tremendous amount of progress made once you combine these things that hasn't filtered down. Now, will the answer combining gravity and quantum physics ultimately go through mind? It may and it may not, but it's going to be something like that. We're going to have to jump out. Clearly, what we have on the table right now for quantum physics and gravity is not enough to solve it. So just like we did with gravity, you got to go out. Wow, mass isn't fixed. Time isn't fixed. Space isn't fixed. We just assume they were. They're not. Same with consciousness. Consciousness, we were thought this one energetic mechanism. No, you need complicated dynamics, horribly complicated dynamics. You need molecular dynamics. You need neural dynamics. You need modular dynamics, all operating in sequence. You need multiple modules in a consciousness cartel. Like, these are complicated, sophisticated ideas that Descartes couldn't even conceive of. And the fellow that first proposed the hard problem in the 90s. He didn't know any of this stuff. He didn't know math. He didn't know anything about physical sciences. He's armchair philosopher. I think I can't see how subjectivity can turn into objectivity. Therefore, I proclaim science will never solve this problem. Boy, oh boy, what arrogance, what hubris. Jeez.
Okay, have you been following this recent, I wouldn't say scandal, but this news event where the scientists got together and have now labeled IIT, Panpsychism and Integrated Information Theory as pseudoscience? Have you been following this?
No, I don't know. Maybe tell me a little bit. I'd love to hear about it.
So I think Daniel Dennett, a bunch of big philosophers, big neuroscientists of our time, all got together recently. Chris Frith, many of them, and this just happened not like probably a few days ago. They wrote a paper where they labeled IIT or panpsychism as a very pseudoscientific approach, and it's gaining so much traction. This has become such a big topic of discussion online lately that you've got neuroscientists, philosophers going at it, thinking that merely labeling something like IIT, which is a very neuroscientific theory of consciousness, as a pseudoscience just completely destroys any sort of search for consciousness overall. This is it's almost akin to, let's say, I can't even think of a great example, but it's almost just hindering the conversation more by trying to claim that any theory outside of mainstream physicalism is labeled pseudoscience at this point, because IIT or panpsychism from that approach is very much a neuroscientific theory, but it's made such major headlines at this point.
So I did look briefly at IIT in the past, but I don't recall the panpsychism part. Can you maybe articulate?
What happens with IIT?
What's the panpsychism idea within this? So
panpsychism, are you familiar with the term?
I've heard it, but it can mean a lot of things. Usually it means everything is conscious, is the most common.
So that's basically what it means. Is panpsychism refers to the approach where consciousness is a fundamental feature of reality. So
that's absurd, silly.
So basically, that's
just a restatement of the hard problem, the immortal soul. That goes nowhere. That is pseudoscience.
Yeah, so from that perspective, what they say is that everything has sort of proto-elements of consciousness, not always from that.
No, that's ridiculous
approach. Some of them actually come to this discussion by saying, okay, let's break down each element of what consciousness is, or intelligence even, and look at a cell, for example. A cell does certain things in a certain way, and then they sort of...
Listen, let me just stop you right there. Look, this is absolutely the number one most common fallacy in all of science, conflating activity for a thing. Oh my God, this just crops up again and again. Here we are in the 21st century, and people are falling for it yet again.
Yeah.
Caloric, people thought that was a thing. People thought heat was a liquid, caloric. No, it's collective activity. People thought flames, combustion was a thing. Phlogiston, no, it's collective activity. People thought life. Where is Elan Vital? We've got to find Elan Vital, the magic substance responsible for life. Elan Vital's throughout the universe. No, it's collective dynamics. Consciousness, same goddamn thing. There must be a fundamental thing in the goddamn universe, like caloric and phlogiston and vital. It always fails. And it's an easy fallacy to explain. It's because our conscious mind, our conscious cartel, is designed to think about reality in terms of things. We resonate on inputs, and in our mind, we conceive of it as a thing. It's our deepest bias is to look at the world in terms of things. And the idea that we'll look at consciousness as a thing, consciousness is in everything, embedded somewhere, like the way phlogiston is embedded in matter and bursts out when you flame. It's just a fundamental misunderstanding of physical reality. Reality is dynamics. It's the dynamics of matter and the dynamics of mind. It's activity and change. If you want to understand something, you understand the activity. The moment you elevate, lionize a thing, that was the problem with the hard problem of gravity. Gravity is a mystic force. Let's look for this mystic force. We got to understand this mystic force. That was not the way. You have to look at lots of dynamics all interacting, and gravity falls out of it. There is no gravity, is what Einstein discovered. It's an illusion of gravity. It falls out of all this other stuff. Same with consciousness. There's no one thing of consciousness. It's dynamics. The more sophisticated the dynamics, the richer the consciousness. The dynamic, our consciousness is way richer than a fish's consciousness. We can make these comparisons.
Let's go into these dynamics, because when I spoke to Steve, He's very intelligent. So it's I feel that Steve sometimes gets in his own way when he's trying to explain a lot of these complex phenomena. I think so. He went at it trying to figure out, okay, how do we solve this stability plasticity dilemma? Let's figure out a solution to this problem, and then he does that. He comes up with adaptive resonance as the main factor that solves this problem, and in doing so, he sort of indirectly figures out, okay, actually all conscious states are resonant states, but not all resonant states are conscious states. A lot of people have been asking from his conversation, and when I spoke to him, they want to know, okay, resonance is occurring. It's very dynamic. This process is happening throughout the body, all over the brain. At what point is this really becoming subjective experience? And a lot of people can't seem to get their head around is there a specific point, or is this such a blurry process that we can't really label it as a conscious point? It's more of the dynamics are so blurry in general that it is consciousness at that point. Are you able to shed some light on that? It's a tough question, I know.
Yes, this is great because there's a very clear mathematical answer to this. This is not vague or ambiguous or uncertain. This is the core. This is the core of the explanation of consciousness. Let me be clear. I think Grossberg's got it, and he's great, but my own interpretation of this might be different than his. So I'm aware of his thing, but I'm looking at a bigger picture, I think, than he is. I'm also thinking about self-consciousness, about language, about superminds, about other things too. So I'm going to fold that in. But Steve did identify the core dynamic. It is resonance. Resonance has it changes over time. It has a shape over time, a time-based trajectory. And that trajectory defines when and how we'll experience that resonant state. The stronger the resonance, the more powerful the resonance, the quicker we're going to be conscious of it, and the more immersive that conscious experience will be. So we have a top-down expectation. Here's how consciousness works again. We have a top-down expectation. We're predicting what we're going to see. I'm looking at my computer screen. I'm expecting to see your face, Tevin, right in front of me. And my eyes give the facts on the ground. The eyes perceive the reality in front of me. So the facts coming in is the face of Tevin. So I'm expecting to see Tevin. I'm perceiving Tevin. The expectation, the activity of expectation and the activity of the perception then resonate. Just like a trumpet and a violin playing the same note, they synchronize, they prolong the activity, they amplify the activity. And it is this trajectory of resonance that determines the details, the precise details of our conscious experience. Not in a vague way, not in a hand-waving way, precisely the exact features in the resonance. And keep in mind, it's not just resonance that produces consciousness. It's resonance with features. There is resonance in the brain without features, and we're not conscious of those experiences. An example is, what is resonance without consciousness? One example is, when we're navigating, when we're moving through the world around us, we have a head-centered system that kind of maps reality with our head at the center, and then an object-centered, like what we're looking at, we kind of map around the object. And those are two systems. They have to be synchronized. They have to be linked up. So they do that through a resonance, but there's no features. It's more like a one-to-one mapping of a code, like the word, like the Secret Service code name of the president, it's like mapping a code name to the actual name, one-to-one. There's no features, there's no variety, there's no change. And therefore, we're not at all conscious of this. We don't have words to describe this inner process of mapping our head-centered space to object-centered space. We don't have words for it because we're not experiencing it. It's only resonance with features, and it's those details of the features in the resonance that maps to our subjective experience. Every feature maps onto a subjective experience and vice versa. And we come into a conscious experience as the resonance begins. Now, keep in mind, we have a consciousness cartel. We have multiple modules, all capable of generating consciousness. This too is a huge revelation and a huge part of the experience of the explanation that the hard problem, people that believe in the hard problem, it would prevent you from seeing the answer because your hard problem insists that consciousness is one thing, a monad, like you were just describing the panpsychism idea, like the fact that we move to that is not going to get you an answer. You have to recognize many parts of our brain are capable of independently generating consciousness. In fact, the very structure of our cerebral cortex, the 6-layered structure of our cerebral cortex, is designed to create conscious modules. We can create new conscious modules in this. And a little later when we're talking, I hope to talk a little about autism. I'll get into that in a little more detail. But the fact that there is there's different modules that each produce conscious, and then these consciousnesses compete. The hard problem says nothing of this. Just like the hard problem of gravity, never imagined that space-time is this bendable thing that we need to know. It turns out there's multiple sources, multiple modules in the brain, each capable of generating consciousness, and they compete. When I'm looking at something, I'm conscious of you, and maybe I hear a sound over there. Somebody says, the house is on fire. Those two things compete for control of the cartel, and whichever starts to resonate with the other modules and gets the other recruits the other modules to resonate together. That's what we become conscious of, and we become more conscious. Music involves 4 conscious modules: rhythm, lyrics, timbre, and melody. Each of those is a different conscious module, different conscious experience, but they all get synchronized. So when we listen to music, we feel more conscious, more immersed, more. The feelings are more intense when we listen to music. It's because there's 4 modules all synchronized, all delivering us, conscious, emotional, perceptual wallops in complete synchrony. And movies, that's why movies are the most immersive art form that we have, because it's all the immersion of music plus visual stuff too. So that takes like all the modules in our brain and gets them to resonate together, and we have more of a conscious experience. And all of this is reducible to the math of the resonant dynamics. By looking at exactly what's happening in each of these resonant dynamics, we can predict exactly what somebody's feeling. We can predict what it's like to be a bat. This is a old mystery and old thought experiment. What's it like to be a bat? We can know, even though none of us are bats. And this speaks to your question, your initial thought that subjective experience is somehow inviolable. There's walled off and nobody can. No. We can, by looking at the brain of another creature and understanding the brain of another creature is not easy and beyond our means now. So I'm not suggesting that you can just throw an MRI on a bat and know everything that's happening in his brain. We're far from that point. But with enough effort, like I know people trying to understand how songbirds sing. I know they're starting to map that sort of thing out. So we could do the same in a bat. And if we understand which modules are conscious, if we can look at the resonances in the modules, we can say, this is exactly what it's like to be a bat. A bat is experiencing this feeling, this sensation, this perception, synchronized with this. So here's what it's like to be a bat. Possible, completely possible.
Okay. So look, you briefly touched on this, but that theory of mind, that's what they refer to it as, is this theory of mind, this ability of us to look at someone else, me looking at you, and understanding that actually that being is conscious, and sort of knowing that there's a sort of mind within that person. Now, the theory of mind is very important when it comes to, as a medical doctor, trying to study some psychiatry and mental health patients. Autism is one of those conditions where theory of mind plays a huge role. Understanding what someone else is thinking, trying to ascertain what information they have versus what you have, and trying to correlate these information is important. And autism is something that you have this diagnosis. Nowadays we refer to it as autistic spectrum because it's very different, and different types of autism displays and portrays itself in different ways. Tell me about how your scientific, we touched on this the last time, but I think let's go into further detail. How does your scientific account of consciousness further explain this mental phenomena?
So first, let me point out that this is another reason why the hard problem in any field, consciousness, gravity, is so stultifying and oppressive and anti-intellectual, is because once you understand these phenomena, if you do truly understand these mysteries, these hard problems, then you should be able to explain new phenomena, new predictions, integrate seemingly disparate bodies of knowledge. And that's what Einstein did with gravity. First, he integrated space and time, which were thought to be separate. He showed there's a very important sense in which they're the same, and how velocity and mass, that there's a relationship there too. Nobody thought that was the case. But even more than that, once he understood gravity in this new point of view, there were new predictions. Black holes. Nobody thought that black holes could exist. Even Einstein himself, he thought of this, did not believe black holes were real when he first saw the math for them. But that's what you get when you have a mathematical understanding, a physical understanding, and it says hey, guess what? This math says there's black holes out there. There are black holes out there. That's how you know you've got an answer. The same with consciousness. If this theory of consciousness based on Grossberg's math and that Sai and I are touting is true, then it should be able to explain other mental mysteries. And indeed it does. And for me personally, the mystery that it solves, the mystery that I personally was after, I am autistic, as you pointed out, and it's a terrible, terrible condition. It's isolating, alienating. People with autism often have a life of being misunderstood, a life apart from others, being disconnected, wondering what's wrong with you. So I felt all of that when I was younger. And when I first discovered I had autism, it wasn't until my late 20s. And I actually discovered it. My best friend at the time, I was in graduate school, and my best friend was studying theory of mind. And I was talking one day, and he was explaining theory of mind is used to study autism, and he was talking about it. And that was the moment I was like, oh my gosh, that's what I have. And I looked out into the world at the time. This was the late 90s, and saw the scientific and academic conception of autism at the time. And I thought, these guys don't have a clue. This is not the way to autism at all. I'm going to toss that out. I'm going to forge my own path and figure this out. That's why I got one of the big reasons. Obviously, I speak to conversations with other entities, and that was a big motivation too. But in the practical world, of everyday world, the thing that motivated me the most was, what is this autism? How does it work? And I quickly understood that you need an explanation of consciousness if you want to understand autism. And so once I finally had that understanding of how consciousness worked, it was possible to understand how autism worked. Let's talk about it. So what the key bit of knowledge, it's not a bit, the key massive knowledge that we need to understand if we want to understand how autism works. And let me say, autism is not a spectrum condition. I know that's the consensus. It's a consensus based on ignorance. By the same reasoning, cancer is a spectrum. COVID is a spectrum. Because everybody manifests differently. I've always thought this was the most bizarre thing. Yeah, people with autism are different. People with any disease are different. People with any mental illness are different. Why is autism the spectrum, and we don't have an anxiety spectrum? We don't have a COVID spectrum. It's just COVID. What kind of COVID do you have? What's the genetic makeup? That's it. It's not a spectrum.
I think what's happening now is that because the world, obviously everything's becoming so politically correct, people are often inclined to start prefacing their comments and not trying to put things into a sort of a category nowadays. I've noticed it's pretty much a pattern with a lot of mental disorders where they're slowly moving towards that sort of spectrum approach. And I find it's just less insulting to some people. Well, I could be wrong.
Well, I can't speak to the social benefits, but in terms of understanding what's actually going on and being empowered to make changes based on accurate knowledge, scientific knowledge of what's in your head, for me, I always take truth over some platitudes that make you feel good. Yeah. So for those in the audience that want platitudes, fine. Call yourself a spectrum, fine. It's not scientifically invalid. But the DSM says it's a developmental disorder. No, it's not a developmental disorder. You just talked about how it's a theory of mind disorder. No, that's also a deception. It's not a theory of mind disorder either. And I know, speaking about platitudes to make people feel better, neurodivergence is this term being bandied about somehow. Since I last checked out in autism, this is the new term, and it is pseudoscientific, completely morally unjustifiable, scientifically unjustifiable. In particular, the notion of neurotypical. That is the most passive-aggressive, unscientific concept I can think of. We don't want to divide the world into us and them. Nothing good ever comes about dividing us and them. I'm neurodivergent, they're neurotypical. That's just downright offensive and wrong. It doesn't reflect any knowledge of the actual brain. But let's actually jump back into how autism works. then you can see why all these things I just said about there's no spectrum, there's no developmental disorder theory of mind, all irrelevant to the problem. Here's what's going on, I think, with autism. So back to the consciousness cartel. How are we aware? How does our mind manage? How does our incredibly sophisticated 4-level mind manage the fact that there's 4 levels of dynamics, 86 billion neurons, parallel dynamics, hierarchical dynamics, all operating at the same time. And yet, in an instant, consciousness takes control of all of it and makes us, the whole brain, focus on the same thing. That is what the consciousness cartel is designed to do. As I just said, we're conscious of many things, are potentially conscious of many things at any given moment. All these models are processing, always working at every moment, and they're each trying to recruit the rest of them. They're each trying to take over the consciousness cartel, and at any given moment, one of them wins, and we're conscious of that particular module's experience. So that's how it's designed to work. Let's figure out where autism comes into this. So the human mind is part of the supermind. We're going to need to take a minute. This is not a detour. This is essential to understand autism. And again, shows how oppressive and pointless the hard problem is, because it's going to prevent you from thinking about things like this. Once you understand that there's a layer of dynamics, physical dynamics in our brain that's responsible for consciousness, and another layer that's responsible for self-consciousness, we can understand what is this self-consciousness dynamic about. That is a supermind dynamic. It requires other minds. You can only have a self, you can only be self-conscious if you're embedded in a community of other human minds, because you need language. Language is what binds us all together. It's the connectivity of a supermind. There are mind-to-mind dynamics. These dynamics are all designed for one thing: shared attention. The reason supermind dynamics are the dynamics of shared attention. Language is the mechanism of shared attention. I say fist, and instantly we have this attention on the same concept. We're looking at the screen. We're going to have the shared attention of my fist on the screen. Peace, love. These are words. You hear the word. We have shared attention. There's other ways to have shared attention. Gestures, pointing almost certainly evolved either in conjunction with language, perhaps even predated it. We point as another way to have shared attention. Look at that thing there. Look at that thing over there. Let's both consider this thing in front of us. Supermind dynamics are about shared attention. The primary, the driving mechanism of this shared attention comes in one of our modules, our most sophisticated human module. The why module is an why am I doing this? The why module is responsible for our feelings, our emotions, our emotional valence of objects and people and activities and possibilities. I don't like him. That's why I'm not going to go to his party. I think she is great. That's why I'm going to try to date her. The why module gives us the why for things. But the why module, as part of this, also does something very special, very human. And that is the why module automatically paints other people with emotional color. So when a normal human, when a non-autistic human walks into a room and they see a book, a bell, a candle, and a stranger, they're instantly going to focus on the stranger. That's because of the why module paints the person, makes them light up in the room. That's the thing we're going to focus our attention on. Autistic people do not have this. When I walk in a room and there's a book, a bell, a candle, and a stranger, I might look at the stranger, but if it's a really interesting book, I might look at the book. I might wonder why there's a candle in this room. I might look at that. It's 50-50 whether I'm going to look at the person or one of the objects. And for autistic people, many of them will always look at the object first. They'll find nothing in particular of interest to the person. People are not getting painted as special. People are not lighting up in our cognizance the way they do in yours. This is different than theory of mind. It sounds similar, But the proposed mechanism, when you hear the theories of theory of mind, it's different. It's not this. So this is saying the Y module in our prefrontal cortex is where most of it's located. It's designed to make people light up in healthy people's awareness. Now that's the start of a complex series of mechanisms in the conscious cartel that ensures that healthy humans focus on people. And once they're focusing on people, they're going to focus on what the people are doing, their conversation, their actions. All of this in healthy people just lights up. It's natural. You don't even feel it or think about it. Of course, I'm going to look at the person. Of course, I'm going to talk to the person. Why wouldn't I? It doesn't even seem to be something to examine. This is why non-autistic scientists have had such a hard time understanding autistic people, because they're not even aware that they're doing this, that they have this. So they're looking at what seems to be the problem. That's why they came up with this theory of mind. That's what it looks like from the outside, but from the inside, just people aren't lighting up in our awareness. I know other people have thoughts. That's not some profound mystery that I had to solve. It's just who the hell cares? I don't care that other. It's no more or less interesting than the fact that this candle is flickering in a really interesting and mysterious and enigmatic way. That's very interesting. The fact that people have thoughts, yeah, that's about equally as interesting to me as a person with autism. So what happens, the normal healthy human brain is designed that if a person's in the room, the entire consciousness cartel is going to go to work on that person. That's what it's designed to do. And then automatically, because that's where the attention is, all these other social mechanisms, learning social norms, learning how to communicate, how to talk to people, learning the right gestures, learning the right thing to say in different contexts. We learn that because in healthy people, the whole consciousness cartel is focused on the right thing, on people. But we lack that. So here's the consequence. This explains so much of autism. And again, after I explain it, I'll show why this means it's not a spectrum condition at all. We autistic folks don't automatically focus on people. What it means is our consciousness cartel can resonate on anything interesting. And that's why those of us with autism have special interests. We have special interests the way other people have a special interest in human beings. We don't have a special interest in human beings. So whatever our individual brain, everybody's brain is different. Even autistic people, they all have radically different brains because everything else besides the autism can be whatever it is, highly variable, highly diverse. So some people's brains might naturally like to process visual stuff. Maybe they'll become painter. An autistic person will become a painter or a designer. I've got an autistic friend who's a brilliant visual designer. She focuses on the visual stuff. I have autistic friends that are great at music. They just happen to be wired. Their acoustic modules just light up easier. They're more attracted to things, and they just happen to be the things that they ended up loving and focusing on instead of people. We don't know. I think an autistic person can end up resonating on just about anything. And this explains why also autistic people sometimes seem so smart at certain topics, at their special interests, why they seem smarter in their special interest than when healthy people have that same interest. It's because in healthy humans, huge parts of our brain are dedicated to learning social stuff. Learning social norms is incredibly resource intense. Learning communication, effective communication with other people, incredibly resource intense, takes lots of neurons, lots of neural dynamics. But we aren't using those parts of our brain. We autistic folks aren't using those resources. What happens instead is, because we aren't focusing on people, our consciousness cartel naturally dedicates those social parts of our cortex to our special interest. So we start taking the parts of our brain that were designed for sociality and instead recolonize it for whatever our interest happens to be at that time. This is a known phenomenon. People who are blind, for instance, their audio modules start to infiltrate and invade what was previously the visual cortex, the brain. This is part of the fundamental competitive nature of everything in the brain. All these modules are always trying to take over each other, like literally, and not just figuratively, literally. And so when if you're blind, your visual module can no longer hold its own. So the audio module just comes in and starts stealing territory. I think that's what's happening in our artistic brains, that we're simply recolonizing these unused social areas, massive unused social areas for our special interests. instead.
Mm.
Let me say one last thing. I know I am talking, and I am sorry. It is my autism. I am not good at social communication.
Either way, the podcast isn't about me, so it's fine.
See,
so you
I monologue on like all autistic folk, I monologue on my special interest. If I was talking about the weather or something, I would be very calm.
No, I mean,
and ordinary. But
I think. Look, I think before I continue the next question, touch on why it's not a spectrum now.
So, if the core source of this is that that human beings are not getting lit up in our cognizance, there might be more than one. I'm sure there's more than one physical mechanism that can cause that. So just saying it's this deficiency in the Y module, there could be many, many ways to end up there. There could be a genetic thing. There could be a biochemical thing. There could be a physical injury. There might be mishaps in other parts of the brain whose effect is to prevent that human painting from getting sent to the right place. So there's all kinds of things that can cause it, but that's not really a spectrum. If all of us with autism are fundamentally suffering from our emotion module not lighting up other human beings, if that's the mechanism, that's the mechanism. It's not a spectrum. It's not that one person has has autism because of X, another person has autism because of Y, another person has autism because of Z. The mechanism is that humans aren't lighting up in our brain. Our consciousness cartel, therefore, resonates on any old thing and recolonizes those parts of our brain used for social material. If that is the mechanism, then it's not a spectrum. It's this one thing. A person who has autism has a faulty Y module. Humans aren't getting painted. That's it. It's not, it could be this, it could be that. And this also helps understand one thing that bugged me, even in the 90s, and especially drives me nuts now. When you look at the list of deficiencies, neural defects, behavioral defects associated with autism, it's long. And the baffling thing is not everybody has these defects. That was one of the reasons people considered it a spectrum. Some people have motor problems. Some people don't. Some people are nonverbal. Some people are verbal. That contributed to this feeling that it's a spectrum. I would argue it's one mechanism, some kind of defect in the human painting. Could be lots of ways it comes about, but that's the mechanism. Just like lung cancer. We know what lung cancer is. There's lots of genetic routes to forming lung cancer. There's not one trajectory to build lung cancer, but it's still lung cancer. It's not a spectrum of different cancers. It's lung cancer. In autism, it's this one mechanism. But if we have anything else going on in our brain for any other reason, then that's not necessarily autism. I know in myself, I have terrible memory. And for years, I thought my terrible memory was because of autism. I just assumed it because, like everyone else, if I've got autism and other brain problems, I assume all the other brain problems are part of autism. But now I know, I've met plenty of autistic people who have terrific memory. But really what helped me get clarity on this is I've realized both of my parents are autistic, my mother and my father. And my mother has terrific memory and my dad has terrible memory like mine. I inherited my dad's terrible memory. It's a separate neural defect. It's not something linked. Now, it might be linked in a sophisticated way in the following. Sometimes we have defects because of there's a receptor in our neuron that we make too many of the receptor or too few of the receptor. And that receptor might appear in many different places. So let's say I'm missing a receptor. Let's just say maybe that receptor's biggest place is in the Y module. And so that's the biggest impact that creates autism. But if I'm also missing that receptor in the motor control, maybe it's going to give me some motor defects as well. So it's possible that some neural defects are caused by the same underlying source as the genetic. But I think in many cases, probably most cases, they're just separate conditions that, because they're presenting in the same person, we think that way. Temple Grandin, kind of the first famous autistic person, very famous autistic woman, she figured out how to make cows happy as they're being killed in slaughterhouses. Before, cows would they get really scared and nervous, and she figured out how to calm them down. She was convinced that her autism gave her a small cerebellum, and that's why she had motor control issues. I don't have motor control issues. I know other autistic people who are terrific athletes and autistic. So the motor control, I think Temple Grandin just happened to have a small cerebellum, not because of autism, just that happened to be something else she had. We have all kinds of neural flaws. Our brains are immensely complex. We're all going to have multiple neural defects. And I think many, many of these are just lumped together. Really, the core of it that we all share, all of us with autism, is we don't naturally attend to people. Our attention management system, our consciousness system, does not naturally focus on people the way it does in non-autistic folks. That's it. Everything else is either not part of autistic or flows out of that primary cause.
Do you think that these attentional differences or these variations in the modula, the Y, allow autistic people access to information that non-autistic people have access to?
So one thing I strongly believe, and I'm always studying, is the notion of states of mind, states of consciousness. So we have, just like there's different states of matter, solid, liquid, gas, there's different states of consciousness. An obvious one, sleep state, dream state, waking, alert state. Now, the different states of matter are defined by dynamics. It's the physical dynamics of a substance that determines whether it's a solid, liquid, or gas. If the dynamics are volatile and loose, it's a gas. If they're rigid and tightly packed, the dynamics are small and tightly packed together, it's a solid. Very similar with our mind's dynamics. The state of consciousness, like right now we're talking to each other, is a state of resonance in our higher function. When we're asleep, that resonance goes away. It's very real that every night when you go to sleep, you die. You are dead. You no longer exist. What you are, if what you are is your resonance, if what you are is your resonant dynamics, every conscious experience you have, every awareness that I am me, I am myself, every understanding of the world is a conscious experience. When you sleep, those dynamics shut off. You know, we tell ourselves this beautiful illusion that somehow we're still there. It's our brain that's still there, but it's not the brain. When we're dead, we've still got the same brain. The brain doesn't go away. It's the exact same brain as when we're alive. It's the dynamics.
What about REM? What about REM?
So REM is another special state of consciousness as well, that the mind has devised. We can't move. So it's resonance, but the motor control is shut off. I think people with autism, we are able to enter states of consciousness different from non-autistic people. I know it took me a long time to think about this and understand this, but when I compare notes with others about conscious states, you know, this is hard to do. It is sort of comparing subjective experience, which you need to be very careful. You know, it's easy to be sloppy. It's easy to be biased and self-serving. So I'm not suggesting this is in any way easy. You have to be rigorous. But I believe people with autism can enter different states of consciousness for this reason, because we don't have that social aspect. The healthy human minds, the entire dynamics are designed to operate around people. Even our knowledge, even what we accept as true and false, even what we accept as knowledge, veridical knowledge about the world, is driven more than anything else about our social group. We believe what our friends believe, our family believes, our colleagues believe, the other members of our religion believe. Our ability to distinguish truth from falseness is far more influenced by what others believe than about physical reality itself. That's because healthy humans enter this kind of state of consciousness that resonates with others, a shared attention. Most humans are perpetually in a shared attention state of consciousness. That's what it's designed for. But we autists are broken out of that. We don't have those shared states of consciousness. We have to work for them. They're hard. They're exhausting to have shared states of consciousness. We can let that go and have a complete and total resonance in our brain that doesn't involve other people, that allows us to look at objects and puzzles and hard problems in a very different way. It allows us to bring all kinds of resources on it and look at it with a perspective that other people don't, because healthy humans They're always feeling, always influenced by what others feel. Just can't let it go. It's how the brain is designed. It's not a question of will or being submissive or anything like that. It's just how our brains are designed. We're designed, healthy brains are designed to really, really give high importance to the beliefs and opinions of others in our group. And people with autism, we don't feel that.
So something quite fascinating that we touched on briefly the last time was how an experience of psychosis from an autistic perspective can be very different. Do you want to open that up a little, and let's discuss how that can change one's experience of a psychotic episode?
Well, I think
from your perspective.
Yes, I think one of the reasons. Now let's get into that the crazy stuff we talked about last time. I think now one of the reasons I've been able to communicate with Intex, I've been able to find a way to interact with extraterrestrials, is because of autistic states of consciousness. This was not at all clear to me for most of my life, a big puzzle, what was going on. But now I'm beginning to, the more and more I talk to others, talk to other autistic people, talk to other non-autistic people, talk, I'm starting to see that I'm able to go into a state of consciousness. It's hyper alert. So that's the number one way to describe it. It's not dreamy at all. It's not in a dream. It's endlessly mutating interpretations. It's a cat. No, it's a dog. No, it's a ice cream cone. It's just constantly changing. It's ambiguous. The stories don't make sense. You try to tell a story and it just goes everywhere. It's not like that at all. These Intex states of consciousness that I am able to go into are hyper alert. It's where reality has crystalline quality. It's like an avatar. It's almost like entering a video game where everything is clearly demarcated. Everything has a meaning. Everything has a purpose. Everything is sharply defined when that happens. And I now think it's because it's a special kind of autistic state of consciousness. Because I can have lesser versions of that in my everyday, when I'm thinking about puzzles, when I'm trying to solve a mystery like consciousness or autism or any of these things, I get immersed in it in a total way where I just, reality fades away and the puzzle itself just assumes this hyper real thing. And Intex is like that to an incredible degree. It's sort of like I'm suddenly aware of the fabric of reality. And I'm aware of things happening. I'm aware of dynamics, and there's things there that want to talk to you, that want to share things with you, and I become open to that. So I think that's ultimately what might be happening in my brain during these experiences, because they're very different. They're not like dreams. They're not like other. I've done a lot of drugs in my life. I know what drug experiences are like of many sorts. And this has always been very different than a drug, than anything. It's just not like anything else. I want to be careful because I'm going to throw myself, if I talk too much about it, I'll throw myself into it. But it's like a transition, crossing over to a state, going from a liquid to a gas, or a solid to a gas. It's something like that. It's just a dramatic shift in awareness.
How often does it happen now? Does it happen often? Yes,
and it's been accelerating. It's near continuous these days. When I was younger, I needed drugs. Throughout my 20s, I call it my time of blood and filth. My life was awful. Back then, I needed drugs, especially LSD. But at one point, I ended up. Intex gave me this riddle. They said if I solved the riddle, I'd be able to access this machine. I solved the riddle. It was this riddle of 9 dots. And I teleported to Moscow. That's a story for another time. But from that point on, after I teleported to Moscow and lived under Putin, from that point on, I no longer needed drugs to enter the state of consciousness. And today I can enter it. I have to be well rested. I can't be tired. I can't be worn down. I can't be intoxicated on alcohol or things like that. That would reduce my. So I do need certain context, but as long as I have that context, as long as I'm alert and well rested, then most of the time these days, I can enter that Intex state. Yes.
Before we continue, Ogi, you mentioned Putin. Tell me about Putin's Russia. I mean, you talk about authoritarian governments. How do you think that, why do you think at least, that Putin's Russia is not conscious, but America's democratic now, government is? And how does this relate to autism? Because we didn't touch on how it relates to autism the last time.
Sure. I think America is democratic. I think what we're witnessing right now is the beauty of democracy. Democracy isn't everybody sharing the same opinion. It is literally dealing with lots of different opinions, which is what our brain is designed to do. The marvel, the majesty, the magic of the consciousness cartel is that it's designed so that no one module, no one neuron, no one anything is in control. It's absolutely decentralized. Ideas constantly bubbling up from anywhere. The conscious cartel will take it. It does not matter where the idea comes from, where the perception comes from, where the conception comes from. The consciousness cartel will take it, figure out what's best for the whole mind. What should I pay attention to? What should I pursue? That's the marvel of consciousness. And if you have those same dynamics in a supermind, then you're also going to have consciousness. This is why democracy is so wonderful. Our brains are chaotic and crazy and messy. Our brains are not logical, fixed, rigid systems, not remotely. It's 86 billion neurons, each which has its own story, its own opinion, its own voice, all clamoring to be heard at the exact goddamn time. It's a dozen modules in our brain that all clamoring to be heard, to be the center of attention at any given moment. And sometimes they get to be the center of attention, but it never lasts long before somebody else does. That's what we're seeing too. The Democrats want to control the American mind. The Republicans want to control the mind. But that's at a high level. We got local state governments. We got local governments. We got county governments. There's so many levels. There's neighborhoods, so many dynamics, so many communities. Each of these wants a voice. Each city wants a voice in its state. Each state wants a voice in the country. Each political party wants to take control of the mind. Democracy, American democracy, gives mechanisms to manage all of this. We allow it to be raucous and chaotic and crazy and unpredictable. It's absolutely unpredictable. Who's going to win the next election? Who the hell knows? It's a toss-up. Maybe somebody who's not even running might end up being the president. That's what America is. In Russia, we know exactly who's going to. They just had elections. Nobody bothered voting because everybody knew who was going to be. That is not consciousness. That's not democracy. Why our conscious mind works is because of this incredible decentralization, democratization. We give every neuron a voice, every neural network a voice, every module a voice. And that's what we try to do in America. And honestly, we do it exceedingly well. What we're seeing right now is a result of the success of our democracy. It's not a sign of our decline. Russia is the exact opposite. Every authoritarian state is the same thing. It collapses. Here in America, we have 300 million minds all contributing to attention in America. In Russia, it's one mind, one puny, tiny little mind. Why on earth would you want to substitute one mind for 300 million? I wouldn't. I want to live in a supermind that's controlled by 300 million people, not controlled by one really sullen, self-absorbed, conquest-obsessed little mind that doesn't really, he clearly doesn't understand war. He was getting his butt kicked. He completely, the problem is when you have that kind of system, there's no incentive for honesty. There's no bottom up. It's all top down. There's no resonance. In America, we have resonance. There's constant. We're voting constantly. We're complaining constantly. We're arguing constantly. Bottom up constantly with the top down, constantly resonating, just like in our brain. In Russia, there's no resonance. In China, there's no resonance. That's why the Great Famine under Mao Zedong. Why did the Great Famine happen? Mao thought everybody in this country was being fed. He thought everything was good and happy. He didn't know there was famine. Why didn't he know it was famine? Because when you've got a top-down dictatorship, all the incentives are to please the dictator. So even though all the local officials knew there was no food and everybody was starving to death, they didn't want to tell Mao that. Chernobyl, under the Soviet system, the Putin system, same exact thing. that Chernobyl turned into a massive disaster that didn't need to happen because everybody, all the local officials were incentivized to lie. You can't get good bottom-up information in a dictatorship, so you can't resonate, so you can't have supermind consciousness. So as chaotic and as unpleasant, and I know it can be scary and upsetting to be in our American democracy right now. It's so chaotic and unpredictable, but nevertheless, it's a lot better than living in a dictatorship.
And tell me, how does that link to the autism? How do you see that relationship with autism?
So in America, in a democracy, when supermind is operating in a healthy way, it is primarily aware of other nations. America, very engaged with every nation on earth. We have embassies everywhere. We have military everywhere. You might be unhappy about that. There's certainly social and moral arguments about that. But as a supermind, we can project power and action and behavior and influence everywhere in the world. We've got the United Nations, and we brought them here in New York City, where we can keep an eye on them. America, a healthy brain, is designed to focus primarily on others. And so we are very engaged in foreign affairs. It's sad, from time to time in America, we have America First streak. MAGA is certainly by far from the first. This just comes up again and again. We had the know-nothings back in the 1830s. The first America First were trying to keep us out of World War II. They didn't want us to go fight Hitler. They're like, let Hitler have Europe. Let's just stay in Fortress America, the America Firsters. But there's a reason America always says no to that and ends up reaching out. It's because it's healthier. We're designed, if you have robust bottom-up mechanisms and you're engaging in the world, you're going to focus on other minds. So sadly, autism is a lot more like being a dictatorship than being a mind. We don't orient towards others. We do get insular. Putin just locked himself in a room and looked at maps and decided, he's feeling aggrieved that the West is ruling everything. I'm just going to go grab Ukraine and other countries. These borders don't matter. Like he's deciding that on his own without any interaction with anybody else, other people, but also other nations. A kind of isolation and detachment and aloofness that results in unfortunate things. And as sad as it pains as I am to say it, I think autistic people are more like that than like America.
Tell me, I notice your background is of space now at this point. That's a nice new change. What's your thoughts on the recent outbreak of these whistleblowers discussing these UAPs? Seems to be a lot of that.
Discuss what?
So UAPs, unidentified.
Are they like UFOs?
Yeah. So they now call it unidentified anomalous phenomena. Just I guess another change.
Well, I haven't
pretty much
looked into it depthly because I don't need to. I'm 100% sure that all the UAPs are either other countries' technology. I mean, we just had Chinese balloons. That is literally a UAP. The military designates anything like that as a UAP. So any foreign drone is going to be a UAP. Our skies are literally littered with UAPs these days because of drone technology and balloon technology and all the rest, or weather phenomena. I don't think there's anything more than that. So here's the thing: there's no plausible reason why extraterrestrials would send little spaceships to us. The resources involved in that would be atrocious, especially anything that would operate according to the same principles as our technology. It's ludicrous. I mean, the extraterrestrials I'm interacting with, they don't need spaceships to communicate with to communicate with us. It just, we can understand this. This is a general principle that we can understand when we think about these levels of purpose, this ladder of purpose, the fact that there's molecule minds, neuron minds, module minds, super minds, and then maybe hyper minds. In my conception, the axiomized, these extraterrestrials, some of them are axiomized minds at the very top of this. By having these different levels, moving from one level to another is very resource intense. Think how costly it was in terms of cash and people to identify a Higgs boson. This is a subatomic quantum particle. In Europe, they have a giant particle accelerator. It costs billions of dollars, not millions, billions of dollars. And I think it was like a team of 1,000 people. The papers that published, they have like 1,000 authors. That's how much crap you need to find one tiny subatomic particle. What if you wanted, 1 million of those particles? What kind of resources would you need? It would be too expensive to conceive of under these things. So moving up and down is incredibly resource intense. If you are at a high level, to move down to these lower levels is expensive. To study bacteria costs money. It's not even though bacteria are small and tiny and their minds are trivial compared to our minds, in the physical reality, actually trying to study them, you need equipment, you need tools, you need a budget, you need multiple people working together, you need a lot of resources. So it's not so easy to go up and down. And we kind of treat it like these massive extraterrestrials. Of course, they're going to easily and want to come to us, but there's a resource question, involved in that. That's the same as the one we face. The physics is the same everywhere. So, like the idea that they're going to build spaceships like airplanes, and fly around our sky, like that's what they're going to spend their resources to do when they,
It's very human. Those are very
yes.
Yeah. Tell me,
if your conception of aliens is something that humans would do, it's it's almost certainly going to be wrong.
Yeah, because let's touch on the hyperminds again, because I don't recall the last time did we discuss the. I think we did. Actually, no. Let's scratch that. Let's try and figure out when these conscious experiences of an altered reality, let's call it an altered reality for now because it is different in that sense. When they occur, how energy consuming is this experience for you? Do you feel like this really does take its toll on you? Is it an active brain burning journey?
Yeah, it's exhausting. It's physically and mentally exhausting. I mean, it's also always terrifying. I mean, even now, it's not. Before it was soul crushingly terrifying. I mean, terrifying on a level I just can't relate in words. It's like being tortured. Having your eyes pulled out or something would be more welcome than because it's an existential torture. Like knowing that there's beings that can take you apart and change your mind and control. That have power beyond your comfort. It's terrifying in a way that our mortal experiences, our everyday, experiences aren't. Today they're less terrifying, but when you're interacting with them, I mean, it's scary. It shouldn't be happening. It's impossible. This is at the moment. However much I talk about my understanding of them, when you're in it, it's just they can do anything, and I don't really know. I have some maybe awareness of some fragment of this now. I have some understanding, but it's mostly just mysterious and terrifying. And so coming out of it, it's leaving this experience that's scary, that's exhausting, that's mentally trying, all of those things. Absolutely.
Is there any sort of physical manifestation of this occurring in real life? Let's say, are these beings interacting with this universe that we engage with on a day-to-day basis? Is there any sort of effect that they're having on reality?
So I mean, they are reality. Like, so they're, let me be very clear. There's just reality that we all share. It's matter and mind. It's the dynamics of matter, dynamics of mind. Even these axiomized minds, they're made of us. They're not something else. It's just like the United States. It's made of people. Like you could say United States. It's the buildings and the land, and it's the Constitution. It's those things, but really, it's the minds within it. If you can take out the Constitution, still have America. You can take out a lot of the land, have America. Still have America. We could move. The boundaries of America shifted. We used to be 13 colonies. Now we're a whole continent. So America's boundaries shift. But if you take out all the minds, no more America. So these beings, they're made of minds of all the lower levels. So it's not just some sophisticated thing up there. It's all these hierarchies, just like we have molecules, cells, neural networks, modules, and then we're in a supermind. The supermind has it's the same thing. The things at the top are just comprised of all of these things. So their purpose, I mean, think about it in terms of their purpose. Their purpose is influencing us. I mean, clearly they're aware of us. They're interacting with me. I've interacted with two for sure, two axiomized minds for sure, that I'm pretty certain about. Maybe others, but unless I'm sure, I don't want to talk about it. And so clearly, if they're interacting with me, their purpose is part of this. But it's the same. It's like thinking about, is America aware of me? Is America? There is a sense in which America is aware of me. Is like the government tracking me? Is the government saying I need to know where Ogi Ogas is every moment of the day? No, but they could. If President Biden said I need to know where Ogi is every moment, they're going to be able to pull that off. But short of that, they're probably not aware of me. So is America aware of us? Is America aware of my town? It's that kind of question. I mean, it's that kind of understanding and awareness. It's like a potential awareness. We're in their field of influence, just like us. I'm not aware of whatever is directly behind me. I can't see it. I'm potentially aware, but if I turn and look, it's my it's a field of stars behind me. So now I know it's something like that. I don't necessarily think that it's super easy for them to influence us, though. I think it's this resource question, and they've conveyed that before too. That the communication always costs resources, and apparently communicating with us is more resource intense. I really think it is like us trying to communicate with a bacteria or something. We can communicate with bacteria, but it's not something you can do for free.
And so I can imagine. Okay, so but I could see that when you thought you were entering it at that point, there's that look of fear in your face. Is there any reason why you think they haven't done anything bad to you at this point? Do you think that they're just kind of benevolent?
I don't know. I've gone through. I've experienced a lot of horrors. I mean, these days it's joyful. It's all come together.
Why is that?
Maybe the means justified the ends. Well, sometimes I feel like they were training me, because where I am now, it all feels like lessons. Like I understand consciousness now, self-consciousness, language, pain. Autism. I just talked about autism. The way of mind, the way my understanding of things is compared to where I started. It's phenomenal. And they led me here, and I feel connected to other people. I was able to overcome my autism to some extent. It's not perfectly, but I love talking to other people now. I love connecting with other people. I care about people's inner life, other people's joys and dreams. And when I facilitate it, I want everybody to understand these things and have these joyful experiences. I want this to be open to everyone. This matters to me tremendously. When I was young, I didn't feel that way at all. I was selfish and self-absorbed and clueless. And I wasn't don't say I was a bad person, but I was a selfish person. So I underwent a moral transformation, and I didn't know crap about how anything worked. When I think about some of my early ideas about consciousness and the world, it was wrong. It's completely wrong-headed. I'm sympathetic to anybody that comes up with bad ideas. You got to get to the bad ideas to get to the good ones. So I now feel that so many of those horrors, like when I died, they resurrected me. I consciously committed suicide once. I was once run over by a car, jumped off the green building at MIT, and died. And then I wasn't dead, but those experiences are beyond terrifying. Yeah, we don't have human words for that kind of terror, where you're dead and then you're experiencing something else. And these beings that I encountered when I was alive are suddenly there and making covenants and offering things, and then you're alive again. I mean, it's. I'm saying these as words. It's terrifying. Behind these words is a terrifying, impossible experience, And I had a lifetime of those. And if you had talked to me when I was 30, I would have absolutely said it was a curse. That this was nothing good about it. This is one reason I never was out there pitching, hey, everybody, talking. I've always tried to talk to some people, but I never felt a big obligation, because I was like, who would want this? It's scary. I just want to be normal. I don't want this. I want a normal life. That was how I felt in my 20s. But then starting after I ended up in Russia, from that point, and then I ended up working with Stephen Grossberg and Gail Carpenter. The extraterrestrials led me to them. So I asked them, I said, I was in Boston College studying psychology. Long story how I got there. I'm writing about it in my autobiography. I don't want to get into it here, but I was at Boston College studying psychology because at that point I didn't understand how anything worked. So I was doing my best. I just wanted to understand Intex and consciousness and autism. How are these working? I don't care how I get these answers. I'm going to get these answers. I thought, for some bad thinking, that Boston College was the way. So I was there and it all was terrible. I wasn't learning anything. That was not the way. And suddenly it was like, nobody on this planet seems to be understanding consciousness the right way. I had intuition now. They've been showing me, they had been giving me this mathematical visions. I knew it was dynamic. I knew there was levels. I knew certain things about consciousness, and nobody on earth seemed to be thinking that way. And so, I asked Intex, please guide me. Where can I get these answers? And they guided me to BU. They told, specifically Gail Carpenter is who they told me to go to. Gail Carpenter ended up being my advisor. I studied with Steve too, but Gail was my advisor and who I worked with the closest. Gail and Steve together came up with adaptive resonance theory. They together, as partners, married partners, figured out the physical dynamics of consciousness. So she was the right person. She's not a side person. She and Steve together figured out the core mystery of consciousness. So it's not just Grossberg, it's Grossberg and Gail Carpenter for that core mystery. Absolutely. Gail's name should always be in there too. So yeah, extraterrestrials guided me there. And then from that point on, that was the first time I heard math from humans that matched the math that the extraterrestrials were sharing me. And then then I've been rocketing.
Have you since then? I mean, since the last time we spoke, you were still fresh out of this almost coming out story to the public. How's that been?
So here's what I now realize. I think a lot about Copernicus and heliocentrism. It's funny. There's two mysteries that I personally have always wanted to know the answers to, and I've gotten answers to both very recently. One was Hitler's Germany. How could an advanced civilized democracy, end up worshiping this evil, self-absorbed, destructive figure? Like Germany wasn't a democracy like us, advanced like us. Really, they were one of the most advanced countries on earth, most democratic, most sophisticated, and they collapsed into this crazy dictatorship. How did that happen? Well, now with Trump, I see, now anybody that's lived through this can understand the dynamics. It's very apparent. It's like, oh, it's not so mysterious. And boy, it's a lot easier than anybody would expect. All this time I thought there must have been something special about those Germans. No, it's just human dynamics. The other great mystery, I've always wondered what it would have been like under Copernicus when Copernicus said, guess what? I think the earth revolves around the sun, not the sun revolves around the earth. What was that truly like to live during that time and to hear that? Because almost everybody rejected him, and today look back, we're like, ha, ha, ha. Those silly people couldn't understand the truth. They couldn't handle the truth. Well, here's the reality. They were perfectly capable of understanding it. It wasn't like it's so abstract or so bizarre that they couldn't understand it. The reason nobody accepted it wasn't because it didn't make sense. It was because so much of their everyday lives was tied into this conviction. Do I go to church? Do I walk down my country lane to church? And listen to my preacher who, for 1,000 years has said the sun goes around the earth. And now I find out that's not the case. Do I, fellow congregants, what do I say to them? When my kids ask me about the dawn, what is the dawn, Daddy? Do I tell them this new story? What if all their friends at school are going to laugh at them if they say, yeah, the earth goes around the sun, not the opposite? What if all the kids call a nincompoop, for believing such a silly idea? These beliefs are woven into our supermind, into the fabric of our connection with others. And now I understand that to possibly accept what I'm saying is like to accept heliocentrism or something like that. It's not just an idea. Yeah. It seeps into everything. If there are aliens, well, if you believe in all kinds of things, physics things, religious things, those won't hold. Those will have to be adjusted. And here's the other piece. We reject knowledge that doesn't fit our supermind, our group. So if you're a physicist, you want an answer that fits physics. If you're an artist, a writer, you want a literary explanation. You want an artistic, creative, that celebrates the humanistic soul, perhaps. If you're religious, you want a biblical, you want an explanation that's conjoined with the Bible. And if it doesn't fit that, you just don't want to hear it. And I understand that. I respect that. We all are trying to make sense of the world. We all have to make sense of it through others, through our groups, through our communities. We all have to live in our communities. I understand it. So I realize, like, what I'm saying, it's not like a small thing. It's not a simple thing. It's not just a matter of changing one belief. It's stitched into the entire fabric of our lives. What we all want, I think all of us want a spiritual epiphany. We all want a moment of transcendence. We all want that grand connection to the cosmos. We just want it to happen on the terms we're already ready for. We want it to be Jesus guiding us if we're Christian. We want it to be a grand unification theory that combines quantum physics and gravity if we're a physicist. That's what we're prepared for. That's what we're expecting to see. Wait, you're telling me that physics is just environmental science, that really mind plays an equally or perhaps more important role than the physics we've been studying? That's too much. What does that say about my life, my beliefs, my convictions? If you're an artist, our artists want great art that uplifts their soul. If the aliens isn't exactly that, maybe there's alien art they'll appreciate. We want those epiphanies, that spiritual revelations to fit what we're already expecting. We don't want, if you're a physicist, you don't want Jesus showing up and talking to you. If you're a Christian, you don't care that there's a grand unification theory. That's not going to do anything from you. And so here I'm talking about, a completely different view of reality that's different from physics, art, and religion. It doesn't match any of those things. And who wants to do the work of that? It's the same problem, honestly. Steve Grossberg. Steve Grossberg's math at this point is so monumental, so complicated. His book, Conscious Mind, Resonant Brain, I've had so many people tell me they started it and just couldn't get 10 pages in. It's too turgid. It's too impossible. I get it. The burden of learning that, it's so huge. And you're like, you know what? I'm just going to go study the effect of the thyroid gland, instead. I'm just going to study what serotonin does to these neurons. All right. I don't need this massive mathematical elaborate apparatus that I'm going to spend 10 years just understanding. And then what, for the rest of my life, I'm going to have to publish papers that cite Steve instead of like it being my own stuff. Who wants that? We all want to be the master of our own fate. I get it.
Have you seen?
I get it. So that's what I'm experiencing.
2017 paper. Have you seen Steve's 2017 paper on the hard problem of consciousness?
Oh, yes, I mean that's the cornerstone.
It's lengthy thing. I mean that paper is quite in depth. That's what.
Yes, it's thick.
And he fills it with so many nuggets of information. It's amazing how much information he's able to condense. It's so much, and yet it's so little from his perspective. I mean, this is him trying to give you the tip of the iceberg of the story.
This gets back to the notion of the hard problem. Yes, it's hard. It was hard. It just wasn't impossible or mystical. Einstein's theory of relativity. If you ever looked at it, most people haven't, because it's a hairy mess. It's the equations. You need to learn a lot of math. It's not even college level math. You got to get to grad school level math to do it. Just like Steve, it's a burden. That's why the gravity is a hard problem. We're just more willing to accept, we expect gravity to have a lot of equations because none of us are expecting that to give us gravity, to give us a spiritual revelation. Maybe physicists are, but most of us don't care that that's complicated. But consciousness, our soul, we care about. And to understand my own soul, I got to read a 500-page book filled with equations? Screw that. I'm just going to keep on believing what I believe.
And it's amazing because he tries his best. He puts so many images and different ways for people to understand it, and yet it's going to be one of those things where if it's either you get it or you don't. It's you have to literally go sift through all that information. Are there any aspects of his work in terms of explaining consciousness and reality that you think he doesn't really do justice in explaining because of his level of intellect and the way he struggles to express it to the layman, that you would like to clarify? But I mean, I don't want you to speak on his behalf, but anything you think is important and worth sharing.
Sure. So he first, in a way, we're all blessed and we should all be grateful that he never got famous, because he spent his entire life, every minute. I mean, I worked with him. I've been to his house and both of his houses many, many times. I've seen him up close. This is a man who has spent every minute of every day trying to figure out how the mind works since he was 17 years old. That is all that he does. He has immersed himself in the mathematical world, and we're all great for it. If at age 40 he had become famous like Einstein, he probably would have slowed down. He might have been corrupted. Plenty of scientists got corrupted by that stuff, like Watson or Crick. I always get the two of them mixed up. One of them got corrupted by his early success, and Crick just became a jerk in his later life and didn't do much more in the way of scientific discovery. That could have been Steve. Thank gosh nobody ever gave him the praise that he deserved, because here he is in his 80s and he hasn't stopped. He's still going at it full speed. He's amazing. A great hero of mine.
And he says,
I'm sorry, your question.
He's got no family history of dementia, so he's going to keep going till his asthma probably takes him out. Is what he said.
Yes. So you asked maybe a limitation. I don't think he really cared about the hard problem, and I don't think he gets it. But he should. I mean, hard problems silly. He doesn't need to get it. He shouldn't waste time on the hard problem. People that demand an explanation of the hard problem. I mean, okay, demand an explanation of gravity. The answer is relativity. If relativity doesn't satisfy you, we're going to keep on studying, wormholes and black holes and white holes and all the rest.
We actually had
the same with Steve. Okay,
we had a great 2-hour conversation on just the hard problem. I think now in his later years, he's realizing the implications his work has.
Perhaps.
And I think he is.
The last time I talked to him about it was about 4 years ago, and at that time he didn't.
He's very much.
It wasn't something.
I can tell it's something that he knows, because that's the one aspect of his work that probably gets the most criticism, particularly from philosophers. And I think he knows it's about time he addresses these problems, which is exciting. Yeah. It's fun to watch.
Yes. I mean, hey, look, he's taking it up. He'll have a lot to say. I'd love to hear what he has to say about that, because he's mostly been neutral through most of his career. And again, last time I talked to him, he hadn't spent time really studying it. Like I don't think he at the time really got it, but that was just a lack of interest, not a lack of ability to understand it, of course.
What do you think Steve and Gail would think about this idea of speaking to Intex? I haven't mentioned it to him. I'm wondering have you ever thought of bringing it up, or you just don't play?
No, I have no idea. I imagine if I was alone in a room with Steve, I would be able to make him understand it. I mean, I would be able to explain it in the terms that he's set up for himself. I mean, I think he'd understand this ladder of purpose and the super mind. I mean, he'd get all of this. And I think when I explained, I think the Intex are communicating with me. I think they're using resonant technology. I think they're creating resonances in my mind. I have these higher dimension when they're sharing the math with me. I enter this higher dimensional state of awareness, and I think what they're doing is they're just adding resonances on to my consciousness cartel. That's really what it seems like and feels like to me. Also, I mean, this is a physical, practical mechanism that could be duplicated. We could recreate this hypothetical Intex technology. It's not hand wavy. It's just a matter of creating resonances that resonate with our existing consciousness, our cartel, which is, that's how our brains formed, when we were young, that we didn't come with this consciousness cartel fully made. It had to learn to all the modules had to learn to communicate with each other and get synchronized and all of that. But I imagine if I was able to sit down with Steve, he'd be able to understand what it was about. Maybe he's even had these experiences. I don't even know. If there's anyone on earth that could possibly have gone there.
I'd love to be a fly on the wall and listening to that conversation. It sounds like something that would be quite fascinating to anything. So, okay, in terms of this whole understanding of consciousness, the heart problem, the mind-body problem, overall, just these biological systems that manifest the psychological system, they seem to be directly linked. There's no sort of dualism between this. Anything that you think you need to clarify and rectify in terms of our understanding and the listeners and viewers?
I always say this, but I'll say it again. Just the number one fallacy, the number one hindrance to understanding consciousness in the mind is mistaking activities for things, is going looking for magical things when you should be going to look for magical activities. The example you just gave of panpsychism, I admit I haven't looked deeply, so this is not a definitive position, but it sure sounds like classic case of thinking there's a thing when it's really an activity. And it's because our brains are designed to operate this way. We carve up reality at the joints. We digitize the world. But if you want to understand the mind and consciousness, you've got to break digital. You've got to go with the flow, literally. The brain is about flow. Consciousness is about flow. America has more flow than Russia. You got to think about thinking in terms of flow. If you can make that one jump, you're 80% of the way there, and you're going to avoid so many of the landmines and potholes that are strewn across the science landscape. That's what I'd say. Just going with the flow, thinking in activity. The mind's a basketball game, not a computer. Doing that, you're already, ahead of most of other scientists.
What would your message be to any sort of autism researchers and their approach to how they should study this phenomenon?
Stop looking at genetics. Looking for that autism gene is just looking for a magical thing. We've been at it for, 40 years. And I know some people have found some correlations. Nobody's found an autistic gene. There's not going to be an autistic gene. It's a mechanism. It's an activity. If you want to understand autism, you've got to understand the dynamics of consciousness. The holistic dynamics of the whole mind is the only route to understanding autism and most of the other mental disorders as well.
And the last time you mentioned, when one has this information that you've received, what were their names again? You said it was 5. I can't remember.
5 and 3 is how they style themselves. Yeah.
When they provided you with this information, it seemed to also enlighten the greater picture beyond all of this. So do you want to tie this off with explaining your view of the universe as a whole, the sort of experience we call reality? What is it? Why is it? Where is it? What's the point of it all?
Sure. So here's the most beautiful, extraordinary is not even a strong enough word for this. The universe that we all inhabit was designed for love to emerge endlessly, eternally. It's a never-ending story of the emergence of ever new forms of love. And this is built into the fabric of reality. This is just how it works. It's part of this cosmic cycle, the ladder of purpose, which I'm always talking about, that at the bottom is physics, quantum physics, the dynamics of aimlessness. Then out of this aimlessness arose the first minds, the molecule minds, and then we keep climbing the ladder, recursive hierarchy, neuron minds, module minds, superminds, hyperminds, on up to the axiomized minds. And then the axiomized minds commit to their mathematical axioms so they can start influencing the parameters of reality, but they're in competition. The universe is designed so no one God can take over. It's many gods, many super duper advanced minds competing for these control of reality, which is why it's not constantly changing and it's why it's not monolithic. But within this cosmic cycle, each of these transitions, each of these rungs, going from molecule minds to neuron minds, going from module minds to super minds, each time you need love. The individual minds on one level have to be willing to sacrifice themselves, sacrifice their individuality, sacrifice some of their independence to join collective thinking, the benefits of being part of the collective. You have to love. You have to love your fellow minds. That's what happened. Individual single-cell creatures like protozoa had to connect as neurons. They had to be willing to give up their individuality and their independence to form neural networks. We as humans, even now, to form superminds, we have to cooperate. We have to care about other people. We're the only creatures on Earth. Well, there's ants and bees and some eusocial insects and naked mole rats. But outside of those very special cases, we're the most cooperative, altruistic creature on Earth. We're the only ones that will help strangers of our own species that we've never encountered before, that will give us no benefit whatsoever. This is the self-sacrifice that's necessary. And what's so beautiful about this, in addition to just the mere fact that the universe is designed for love, which is incredible, is the fact that it limits evil. How does it limit evil? You can only rise to new levels of purpose and intelligence and adaptiveness and resilience through love. If you're not willing to sacrifice yourself and join collectively with others to support a community over yourself, then you won't get to that new level of purpose. The only way we're going to form hyperminds is if all the superminds on Earth get along, if we all treat each other with respect as equals. The reason our brains are so powerful is because we empower every neuron in our brain to have a voice. We empower every module in our brain to have a voice. It's decentralized. There's no Putin neuron. There's no Hitler module in our brain. They all have equal. That's how you get the greatest intelligence. This is why America has been the most powerful and influential, not just powerful, influential mind on Earth, is because we do a better job of almost any other country of giving everybody a voice. And it's becoming more so. The internet's social media is empowering everyone. It's just that everyone thinks differently. So for the first time, we're truly seeing how everybody else thinks. And guess what? Tons of people don't think like you.
Yeah.
And we're all shocked by this and we're all upset by this. That's our tribalism. That's our own supermind. Wait, who are these MAGA folks? Who are these woke folks? I don't see them in my town. How are they controlling the government? It's upsetting, but this is how it works. This is the same mechanism as in our brain. You don't want everybody thinking alike.
Yeah.
You don't want everybody forced to think alike. Yeah, go live in Russia if you want that.
And Ogi, we started nice and early, so I've run through all my questions. Are there any topics in particular that you feel really inspire you at this point, and you love talking about it? In terms of having these podcasts and conversations, what's really on your mind at the moment? What's really getting you going every day?
Oh, thank you for asking that. But to be honest, right now, the autism is the thing that I'm most excited about. It's clearer than ever about these mechanisms of autism, and I'm elaborating. That's the thing I'm focusing on the most right now. The way I always viewed it is I wanted to understand autism in my own brain. I initially bought into the notion that maybe it is a spectrum. And so my initial position was, I'll understand my own autism, and maybe there'll be some other people like me, maybe it'll help some people, but I didn't think that it would explain all of it. And perhaps it doesn't, but I'm convinced at least that this is the core mechanism, this inability to paint others in the Y module, which caused our consciousness cartel to focus on any old thing, whatever our brain. I'm more interested in thinking about the mind and abstract stuff. So that's where my mind goes. Another person might like sports. That just might be how their autistic brain their lights up, and so they go sports. It could be anything, but not other people. So really working out these mechanisms and tools for overcoming it is what I'm doing now. That's my main focus. Actually, is I figured out some tools that are very powerful and effective for me, and so I want to share them with others.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. The theory obviously has this explanatory power and predictive power, which is fundamental to what you want in a theory. You want it to explain phenomena. You want it to actually enlighten you on topics that go beyond the actual theory itself, not merely being false.
Yes.
It's not all.
That's right.
Yeah. So, with that being said,
I want people to live a better life, a concrete life. I live a joyful, connected life now because I figured out how the autism works, how the consciousness works, and what to do about it. Because once you understand it, once you have that clarity, you can take smart choices. So I see now so many autistic people are following these myths, these wrong ideas. And there's, if I do this, then this, but it's disconnected from the underlying neural and physical reality in their brain. And they're not necessarily going to make much progress pursuing some of these ideas, and that saddens me. And having a better understanding of consciousness. Yeah, consciousness, it's not just some abstract thing. It leads to concrete results. That's what's so important. You can understand pain, anesthesia. These are concrete, physical, medical mysteries that can be illuminated by this. Just like if relativity was real, it should make predictions, and it does. Black holes, we have GPS technology. GPS is based on the equations of relativity. This abstract notion has a very physical, practical use in our time. And I think it's going to be the same for these mental disorders. Once we get this better understanding of consciousness, we can start developing therapies that are based on true knowledge, not based on this notion of a spectrum. As long as you're operating in this spectrum that autism has many faces, many forms, well, then you're going to think that any old thing might work for any old person. Maybe that person's not the same. But if we all have the same underlying mechanism, then we can all, we can have a centralized therapy, a primary therapy. And then, there's going to always be variations and others. Everybody's got different things going on. It's not going to be monolithic. But we know we start out with looking at this thing first, not imagining it could be any old thing.
How do you think the psychiatry fraternity are going to look at this view or perception of autism?
That's a whole other conversation. Maybe next time you can have me on. We can talk psychiatry. I did a book on psychiatry with the president of American Psychiatric Association. It's Jeff Lieberman. He was at the time in charge of the rollout of the DSM-5, the Bible of psychiatry. So we go behind the scenes, see exactly how it was put together. We got to talk to all the leading psychiatrists and got real deep in the history of how the DSM was made. And the story there that I think most people don't know, that it's sad. It's a tragedy more than anything, but one should not give too much credence to the DSM. It's anchored in its history, in its non-scientific history. It's trying to break out. They've made progress, but they have not broken free of this legacy of pseudoscience and unscientific thinking. And the problem is now, to be honest, there's too many. The DSM in psychiatry is too connected to too many things. It's rigid. It can't move. It's like the Queen of England. Like, in one sense, the Queen has the most power and freedom, but another, she can't do anything. She has to do exactly what everybody expects her to do. The insurance system needs DSM to be a certain way. Our school system, how do we decide what to do with this kid who has this diagnosis? Kick him out, help him, give him therapy. Autism, do we give them a special treatment? What do we do? Tied to the DSM. The DSM needs to be fixed and stable for our educational system. Pharmaceutical companies, they need to know what a disease is. They can say, here's the prescribed drug for this. Yeah. If it's willy-nilly, they can't operate too. So many giant superminds, so many giant institutions are so tied into it, not in a malevolent way. It's not a hostile way. It's just how it is now. If you change autism in a radical way, it's going to disrupt so many things in society, across society, massive things, $trillion things that we're talking about. Hundreds of millions of people involved in this sort of stuff. You can't do it lightly. So they're locked into basically the DSM-3R. They're never going to get very far from Bob Spitzer's notion of mental illness that he came up with, with the DSM-3. So yeah, don't look to the DSM and psychiatry for innovation and big, bold moves forward. It just can't happen institutionally. And that's a tragedy, but yeah, we can work around it.
Well, I mean, that obviously then leaves us with a lot to discuss in the future as well. And yeah,
yes, I hope so.
It's such a pleasure, Ogi. It's always great to chat to you. I mean, it's always a fun time.
Tevin, thank you so much. I know I monologue. I'm so sorry. This is the stuff I'm so passionate about. I love talking about it, and I just can't control myself. I'm going to try harder next time. I promised myself I was going to be slower. I absolutely failed.
Well, the goal of this podcast isn't really for me to talk. So I think that the guests come here to watch you guys. So it's always great for me to listen. I enjoy it all the time. So thank you again.
Well, I love your format, and I love being here. And thank you so much for having me on, Tevin. Your show's great.
Anytime, Ogi. And yeah, I look forward to round 3. I mean, next time I think we'll touch on various different aspects. Maybe we can cover different mental illness, how this explanatory power translates into those. And yeah, we can move from topic to topic.
Yeah, let's talk about psychiatry. I know you're a doctor yourself, so you know, I would imagine you'd have some insight and some relevancy to you too. So yeah, let's plan for it.
That's pretty much the main. I mean, the goal of this podcast is more philosophically driven, but there's always some sort of a practical significance to everything, and I think exploring those always adds a benefit to this.
Well, exploring that, what is mental illness? I mean, that's a deep and profound philosophical question that I'd love to explore. I mean, very relevant. I mean, to me, I mean, I wrestle with it all the time. Am I mentally ill or not mentally ill? How should I think about this autism? Am I human? You know, or not human? So yeah, definitely plenty of philosophical questions to explore in an examination of psychiatry.
I'm looking forward to it, Ogi. Thank you again, and cheers and take care. Look forward to round 3.